Everybody for being here. It's a pleasure to kick off the CAE forums for this year. Thanks, Josh. Thanks, Amy, and the CAE community. My name is Seth Hamman. I'm the Director of Cybersecurity at Cedarville University. Cedarville is a private Christian college near Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which is in Dayton, Ohio. So we're out in the cornfields of Ohio, about 30 minutes from Dayton, and we're nearby where flight was invented. The Wright brothers grew up around here, and therefore one of the largest and most complex Air Force bases in the world sits about 20 miles from where we are at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. As far as our involvement in the CAE community, Cedarville became CO designated, the cyber operations designation, in 2018. And then we achieved the cyber defense designation just this past year in 2021. And I help lead the community of practice for this cyber operations designation. I want to be cognizant of all of your time. It's a busy time of year. Hopefully we got a breather a little bit over Labor Day, but I know that there's a lot going on as we kick off the semester. I assume many of you are in education. So let me go ahead and go. Cybersecurity is important. You know, we use the phrase cybersecurity incident, but increasingly that's a misnomer. And when you get hit by a ransomware and you have to close your business down, it's a crisis. It's a cybersecurity crisis. And when ransomware or some other attack comes against critical infrastructure, we actually could have cybersecurity catastrophes. We may have already had some of those, and it's possible we'll have more in our future, unfortunately. Our government recognizes this, and it's been pouring lots of resources into cybersecurity education. And for good reason, because there's going to be a lot of solutions for the cybersecurity problems that we face, but the solution behind all the solutions is cybersecurity education, because everyone that's going to be working in the cyber ecosystem is going to have some first basic exposure to cybersecurity, and then an opportunity to develop their skills. And that's what's happening in K through 12 and also in higher ed across our nation. So it couldn't be more important. This slide just shows that we're inhabiting two worlds these days. We have one foot squarely in physical space, and then we have another foot increasingly in cyberspace. And it seems like more and more these worlds are blending. So just like we care about physical space security, and we always have, and we just kind of take it for granted, you know, that things are going to be safe, and we're going to have locks on our doors, et cetera, and we're going to be able to protect ourselves and those we love in physical space. Well, the same phenomenon holds true for cyberspace. We need to make sure our cyberspace is secure, because more and more of our lives are being lived out in that domain. Another thing about cybersecurity is it's inclusive. This is just a little flow chart, whatever org chart I put together about the cyber ecosystem. Cybersecurity is a really broad term, but in a higher ed institution, you might see a cyber program in the computers and with computer science and engineering. You could see it in the business school. You could see it over in social sciences with law. There's a lot of different facets to the cybersecurity problem, and there are many ways it's being solved, and it takes all of these ways. So there's room in the cyber ecosystem, really, no matter what your skill set is, even if you're not a computer programmer, if you're not into math, coding, well, you're probably not going to be on the far left side of the spectrum, kind of in the cyber operations field, but you may find yourself more in the social science side, or maybe in the business arena, working with cyber, or securing a network, or thinking about cyber risk management. So cybersecurity is for everybody, and cybersecurity is interesting. So not only is it important, not only is it inclusive, but it's an interesting field. And in this age, it's coming of age right now. So this is the golden era of cybersecurity, and it's really fun to be involved in it, like all of us on this call are. And what makes cybersecurity interesting, I think, is the adversarial conflict that's at the heart of it. I'm going to talk about that in this talk. So what is the essence of cybersecurity? Well, there's lots of definitions on cybersecurity out there. This is one definition. It's pretty long. I'm not going to take the time to read it, and not that it's not helpful, but there's a much simpler way to think about what cybersecurity is. It's attackers plus computers. Those are the two primary ingredients of cybersecurity. If you take away the computers, well, then you have a world with bad guys or with attackers or with offensive and defense in it. And you have many important fields of study, many important careers like in criminal justice, criminology, public policy, military studies, but you don't have cybersecurity because you don't have cyberspace. On the other hand, if you take away the attackers, then you have a world where cyberspace exists, and therefore you have computer science, computer engineering, software engineering, information technology. We have web apps, mobile phone apps, etc. But if there's no attackers, you don't truly have cybersecurity. You might have some kind of incidents due to random failures or acts of nature, but you don't actually have cybersecurity. So one way to think about what cybersecurity is it's just these two things in a world where these two things exist together. Attackers, or we can think of them sometimes, in some contexts, they're bad guys. In other contexts, they may be good guys. Maybe people that work, for our government, in the military, intelligence community, who are on the attack, doing offensive cyber operations. But you have to have kind of that element, plus you have to have cyberspace. And really, it all boils down to authorization. That's what I mean when I talk about attackers. You have the cybersecurity coin has two sides, has defenders on the one side, and they are authorized users, and they have authorization to read, to modify, and to access computer resources. So that's the CIA triad of cybersecurity. Meanwhile, you have attackers on the other side of that coin, and they are trying to, in an unauthorized way, disclose information, alter information, and deny, degrade, disrupt, destroy information and computing resources. So another helpful way, I think, to think about cybersecurity is just think about authorized access versus unauthorized access, and those two coins. And so we have attack and defense very similarly related, and this is just kind of one way to think about how cybersecurity relates. Here's my slides here. So the bottom line, the point of what I've been saying so far is that the cybersecurity is only necessary because of the existence of people who deliberately attack computer systems and networks. And in our vernacular, we call these people hackers. It's kind of a coarse grade term, but it works for our purposes today. And what a difference hackers make in the world. Without hackers or these attackers, we have accidents, we have hardware failures, people lose data, they get frustrated with computers, things fail, fires happen, floods happen, et cetera, et cetera. That's bad. And we need an IT infrastructure to kind of prepare for that and defend against that and get ready for that and recover from that. That's all true. But when you add attackers in the mix, now you have ransomware that's deliberately finding vulnerabilities in your infrastructure and taking your data captive. Much, much more difficult problem. So we still have all the other problems, but now we have the more difficult problem of an actual live human being or many human beings that are out there attacking us. In a world without hackers, you have a computer, it's going to be slow, it's going to be buggy, you're going to have issues with it. That's annoying, it frustrates users. But when you have a world with attackers, now all of a sudden you have Trojan horse viruses that are coming in, infiltrating people's computers. They're on the computer when we don't even know they're there. They're watching what we're watching. They're seeing what we see on our computer. Much, much worse problem than just being frustrated by a slow computer. So making this point, I want to think about, well, what then is the hallmark of cybersecurity? If you think about mathematics, the discipline of math, that you'd find in the academy, one of the main things that mathematicians do is they construct proofs. They're trying to prove things. They start with presuppositions or axioms, and then they build up an argument for a proof. So they might be proof by induction, proof by contradiction, etc. Many different types of proofs. And so in order to think that way and to excel in that field, you have to be logical and rigorous in your thinking. So you can make the claim that the hallmark of mathematics is logical thinking. So it's a certain type of thinking. Let's go to computer science, a field much closer to cybersecurity. Here, you're writing software. And when you're doing that, you're writing algorithms, computer programs. So we could say that the hallmark, and it's a distinguishing feature of computer science, is algorithmic thinking. And we really need to impart that to our students. And to be good at computer science, you have to have that skill. Well, what would we say about cybersecurity? Does it have a hallmark? Does it have like a distinctive way of thinking that is vital to success in the field? So we're going to have security practices, but in order to do these things well, we have to do, and I think this is pretty commonly accepted, the importance of adversarial thinking for cybersecurity. But I make the case that it's at the very center of the discipline, because again, without adversaries, you don't even have cybersecurity. So there's an old Hebrew proverb that says, "Do you see a person skilled in his work? He will stand in the presence of kings." And I think for a mathematician, that means that he has to be very logical. He has to have that skill. For a computer scientist, he has to understand algorithms and algorithmic thinking. And for our field, cybersecurity, that person has to have this ability to do adversarial thinking. So what does adversarial thinking mean? That's kind of the million-dollar question. It's not that easy to define well. Most people say, well, adversarial thinking is the ability to think like a hacker. And that's really, it's almost just like mixing the words up and just repeating the question back. Well, then what does thinking like a hacker mean? So if we want to take a closer look at what adversarial thinking means, we can get thinking more clearly about what does it even mean to think. And so that's something that I've done, and I've looked at that question, and I've studied a little bit of cognitive psychology, and I came across a guy named Sternberg. And he came up with a triarchic model of what it means to think, or of kind of what it means to be intelligent. And he has these three areas. He has an analytical area, a creative area, and a practical area. And in each of these areas helps, promotes, encourages, is part of what it means to think. So an analytical area would be essentially like doing math problems, what we might think of as book smarts. That's certainly part of what it means to think. There's also a creative element to thinking, something that like an artist would have. You know, so maybe Einstein would be an exemplar for the book smarts. For a creative, we might have somebody like an artist or musician or an author, maybe Vincent van Gogh, who just has this ability to make unique connections, to see things in a different way, to bring to light something that was previously hidden. That's a creative ability. So Sternberg points that out. There's a creative, there's an analytical, and there's also a third thing that's not quite as obvious. And he calls it the practical way of thinking, or practical intelligence. And this is the ability to strategize, to plan, and to accomplish goals. CEOs have this in spades. Military generals would have this. It's the ability to create a goal and achieve that goal, knowing what obstacles are going to be in your path and overcoming those obstacles. And so what we can kind of think of that as just having street smarts. So this is a way to summarize what Sternberg characterizes, and there's other models. There's some models with 10 things, 20 things, 5 things. This one's very simple, and I think it has a lot of explanatory power. And so I've taken these categories and I've thought about, how does this apply to cybersecurity? And if I'm going to think about adversarial thinking, then how can these three areas, the analytical, the creative, and the practical, what does that have to do with cybersecurity? So I've asked myself these questions. How do his book smarts contribute to his hacking prowess? Is there an overlap there? Is the ability to have analytical thinking, does that have anything to do with hacking? What about creative ability? What is there a relationship between being creative and being a hacker? And then what about practical ability? The ability to plan, overcome obstacles, succeed without getting caught. What does that have to do with computer hacking? Like if I'm going to try to think like a hacker, I can kind of frame it in terms of these three questions. And I've done that, and I've come up with a definition. And this is in the literature. I published this maybe about 5 years ago. I couldn't find a good definition of adversarial thinking out there. I haven't done a literature review in the last year or two, so maybe there are other definitions that exist now. But this is the definition that I published. Adversarial thinking is the ability to embody the technological capabilities, the unconventional perspectives, and the strategic reasoning of hackers. And you can see where I got from the analytical side, the technological capabilities, the creative side, the unconventional perspectives, and the practical side, the strategic reasoning components of this definition. To the extent that a person can do this, that is to embody adversarial thinking, to really do this well, to have that skill, they're going to be able to compete with hackers on a level playing field. That's hugely important. We want to make sure that we can do that, our students can do that. They're going to be able to find and fix vulnerabilities before hackers have an opportunity to exploit them. So that's that second component. And then thirdly, they're going to be able to anticipate future attacks and thwart attacks in progress. That's that third component, which is strategic reasoning. And I have in my definition here the word embody. That means to like take on. The more that I can embody this, like an actor embodying a role, the better I will be, especially at the more technical components of the cybersecurity ecosystem. So a solid cybersecurity education must equip you for the technological battle of might, the creative battle of skill that's ongoing, and the strategic battle of wits. And you can break these down a little bit further and think about, okay, so if I have these three components, I've been charged to go in a classroom and teach my students adversarial thinking. I can break it down now into something that I can actually have a tangible learning outcome, and then I can assess that learning outcome. So if I'm going to focus on the first of those three in the definition, the technological capabilities, I want to make sure, and again, I'm on the more, in that picture I showed earlier with kind of the org chart type of blocks, I'm talking about being on that left side and being in the more technical fields of cybersecurity and really being down in the trenches. I'm going to have to make, and that's where I am here at Cedarville, and that's what we teach here, and maybe many of your programs do the same. I'm going to have to make sure that my students understand technology at a deep level. They understand operating systems, network protocols, programming languages. If they have these skills, then they can compete with hackers on a level playing field, because I guarantee you the hackers that are out there, the good ones, they know these things. They know the systems administration tools and techniques. They know how to defend a computer network because they understand how firewalls work and how you would configure a firewall. And they understand it to such a degree that they can actually get underneath it, get around it, subvert it. And so they have that technological capability. So kind of an example of this might be command line kung fu. I want my students to be able to be really good at a command line and have systems administration skills on like a Linux box or in PowerShell or something like that. I think that in cyber ed today, we do pretty well at that learning outcome. We actually focus on it. Most of what we do is around this particular learning outcome. Now, we don't think of this as adversarial thinking, but I'm characterizing this as actually a component of teaching our students to think like the adversary by giving them these really deep skill sets in technology. Moving on to the second one, which is unconventional perspectives. We need to help our students to identify unconventional use of software and protocols that could be exploited as attack vectors. This is that creativity. You see a software, a program that's supposed to be used this way, an attacker turns that on its head and uses it to gain root on the system, right? They've made a unique connection. They've applied a creative mindset to a problem, and they found a vulnerability, and then they can exploit that vulnerability. Cross-site scripting would be an example of this. I'm on a web page, it's asking me to put in my username or my birthday. What if I try to buffer overflow attack? What if I try a cross-site scripting attack and I start putting in JavaScript in there? That's unconventional. It takes creativity to even think about trying to do that. Sometimes we call this in the classroom the hacker mindset. It's like how would a hacker view this situation? Kind of what would they do? How could they subvert this technology? And we need to teach this to our students. I tell you, this one's pretty hard to teach. It's creativity. It's like teaching somebody music or how to write or how to draw or how to paint. It's doable, but it's difficult. I think we do this with case studies, with maybe capture the flag competition. So this is part of our educational experience, but this is an area where we kind of more discover it. And I'm not saying we don't cultivate it, nurture it, but we can discover it in our students by different means. The third area, though, what Sternberg calls practical intelligence, is what I want to talk about in the rest of this talk today. Practical intelligence is the ability, and here the connection to cybersecurity is strategic reasoning. It's the ability to anticipate the strategic actions of hackers or adversaries, including where, when, and how they might attack, and their tactics for evading detection. So an attacker might use Trojan horse malware. That to me is very strategic. it has elements of these other components, but at its core, it's a strategic way to get you to download malware onto your computer. I'll make it a Trojan horse malware. So yeah, you look for that hex editor and you Google hex editor for download and you find the first result and you click and download it and you actually get a hex editor. But you got something a little bit more than you bargained for too. Maybe you got some remote access Trojan on the back end of that. And so that's a hacker way of thinking. It's a way to avoid detection, a way to, I would say, phishing attacks, social engineering fall into this category. So we need to teach our students how they can anticipate these actions, how they can find the bad guys, how they can get out ahead of them. And I call that, this learning outcome is revolving around strategic reasoning. This one, I don't think we're teaching very well in the classroom. So the first one we're doing in spades. The second one, I think we do pretty well through capture the flags and some case studies of attacks. The third one, I think we by and large ignore. We don't do a lot in this area. And I think we do that to our detriment. And that's where game theory comes into cybersecurity. I believe that game theory has a role to play in cyber ed today. And it's a way to teach strategic reasoning. Strategic reasoning is taught in schools and in higher ed. Mostly we might see it at a military academy where they have like military strategic studies. We might see it in a business school, an MBA program, where you're running a corporation, you're trying to figure out how many widgets to produce, knowing that your competitor is producing at this price, and you have to figure out how to think that through. So the field of economics actually is where game theory was born. And so if you're an economist, you're going to take a class on game theory. And you might take it in military studies, you might get some exposure to game theory, because really this is the way we teach strategic reasoning. That's kind of a way to define what game theory is. It's the study of strategic reasoning. And when I say game theory, I don't mean some handheld game like Animal Crossing here in this picture. I mean more like chess, a game where it's a battle of wits, where you're trying to anticipate what your opponent's going to do, and that informs what you're going to do. So chess would be considered a game theoretical game. There's a lot of game theory games, but any game theory game has multiple players. It has interdependent choices, and then it has utility values. Each player trying to maximize their utility. That's kind of what makes up a game theory game. And I've developed some curriculum to teach my students the rudiments of game theory. And so I'm going to walk through some of that now in the time we have remaining in this session. Thinking about what your opponent is thinking about. That's really the primary objective that I have in teaching game theory. I'm not trying to make game theorists out of my students. I don't have a full, semester's load of content, and we're not deep into the weeds of graphs and charts and solving math problems, which is a lot of what game theory is. I'm going at a higher level and just teaching them the basics to help them to think about what the adversary is thinking about, because that's really what game theory causes us to do. And every kid does this. We all do this, and this is a pretty familiar game, hopefully to all of you on this call. It's called rock, paper, scissors. And it's this idea, 1, 2, 3, shoot, and then, what is it? Paper beats rock, scissors beat paper, and rock beats scissors. And so you're trying to anticipate what your adversary is trying to do. And then if you think they're going to do rock, then you're going to do paper. And when you do that, this is a game theoretical game because there's interdependent choices going on. The winner of the game there's no one right answer. It isn't like you can solve the game. You have to anticipate what your opponent's going to do and then one up your opponent. And that's a very simple way to think about really what game theory is about. Trying to anticipate what the adversary is going to do and then have that inform what I am going to do. So this is a more complex game theory game. It's one of the oldest games in game theory. It's called the Colonel Blotto game. In fact, this game was invented before the field of game theory came into existence in the 40s and 50s. This game is from 1920. So then later it was re-imaged as this is a core game theory game. It's a very important game that captures the essence of the scarce resource allocation problem, which is a problem that we all face in many different areas of life, where we don't have enough resources to do everything we want to do. And so this is a game theory game where we can capture the essence of what that would look like. It's called the Colonel Blotto game. And the story goes like this. You have two colonels out on a battlefield somewhere. Maybe they're surveying actually some battlefields maybe the battlefields are down in a valley and they're up in an elevation somewhere. It's the cover of darkness. And they know that there's going to be these three battles that are going to take place the next morning. And I have them circled here on the map. We can call them Battlefield X, Battlefield Y, Battlefield Z. You have Colonel Blotto, who has a certain number of soldiers, in this case 9. And then you have his adversary, Colonel Alto, who also happens to have 9 soldiers in this very specific game theoretical setup. Each colonel needs to allocate their scarce resources, which in this case are these soldiers, to the battlefields. And the way the game is set up is whomever allocates more soldiers to a battlefield wins that battlefield. And it doesn't matter whether you allocate 1 more soldier or 10 more soldiers, as long as you have more soldiers, you win. And you do have to decide what happens in the case of a tie. And we can say if there's a tie, both sides lose. You could say they split the value of the battlefield, et cetera. There's lots of variations to the game, and I don't want to get down into all the weeds of all the different variations of game theory games. But in this case, let's say they have 9 soldiers, which this means it's a level playing field game. They both have the same number of soldiers, and there's 3 battlefields, and all the battlefields have the same value. Let's say they're all worth 1. And so each colonel here is trying to win the most points. So in the cover of darkness, they allocate their soldiers. Dawn happens, the soldiers fight, and then we see who wins the battle. So Colonel Alto here did some quick math. Oh, well, there's 3 battlefields. I have 9 soldiers. I'm just gonna, dole out evenly, 3, 3, and 3. Colonel Blotto takes a different approach. He also only has 9 soldiers, but he decides to go 4, 1, 4, and he picks the top and the bottom with which to deploy his 4 soldiers. And so in this particular game, Colonel Blotto wins. Because he wins the war, I should say. He loses 1 battle, but he wins more than he loses. He wins 2, so he gets 2 points. Colonel Alto gets 1 point, therefore Colonel Blotto wins. So again, this game is just a very simple way, in a mathematical way, in an essential way to think about scarce resource allocation. I only have so many man hours to view log files and to check to see if there was a security incident. So I have scarce resources. I don't have an unlimited supply of money to hire people and to train them so that we can scan logs efficiently, get 100% coverage to see exactly what's going on in our network. So I've got a scarce resource allocation problem. So how many man hours do I allocate? How do I allocate those hours? What you're describing there, it's a very real world situation. You're describing a type of Colonel Blotto game. So this game helps us to think through situations like that. And maybe if we have an adversary and it's an attack situation, what our adversary might be thinking and then what we should think in return. So for those of you who are on this call, if you have internet access, I'd like for you to play a Colonel Blotto game with me. I call it DDoS attack. I won't go into the whole DDoS setup because it takes a little bit of time to tell the story, but you can just think of this as a straight up game theory game with 6 battlefields instead of 3. And all the battlefields have equal value. They're all worth 1 point. So instead of X, Y, and Z in the previous slide, now we have A, B, C, D, E, and F. They're kind of laid out this way. And no one battlefield is worth more than any other battlefield. They're all worth 1 point. And you have 120 soldiers. So you have 120 soldiers, you have 6 battlefields, and you need to allocate those soldiers across battlefields. So if you wouldn't mind, or and you don't have to, but I think it'd be fun if you participated, go to this URL. I promise it's not any kind of phishing URL or anything like that. cyberops.cedarville.edu/CB for Colonel Blotto. When you go out there, you should see something that looks like this. This website. Exercise, Colonel Blotto game. Your task, allocate 120 soldiers across your 6 battlefields. So the idea here is, in this we'll do some simple input validation. I'll make sure you put numbers in the fields. And you have to put some number in every field, even if that's a 0. and you only have 120 soldiers, so it'll also make sure that you've allocated 120 of your soldiers. So you could put all 120 on one field, and you can divvy them up anywhere in between. But you have to sum to 120. So take a minute and think about how you would do that. And when you finish, go ahead and click Submit Answer. I'm going to give you a minute to do this. Google stop our timer. That's what I will set a timer here for 2 minutes. Start. Okay. Oops. I'm going to check something over here. Hopefully some of you are participating in this and you were able to make it to the website. If anybody has any issues with it, please let me know.
A lot of people are saying the website's not loading, Seth.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Let me see if I can refresh it here. We may have DOSed my web server. It's not a very good one. Just a homemade web server I set up for this.
I'm getting it's not secure.
Okay. Sorry. That's great for cybersecurity.
Could you drop
This is just something I set up on Cedarville's network, and they don't even know that it's here, and they probably would take it down if they found it. So I'm not practicing great cybersecurity. Let me see. Yeah, and I actually have the admin screen up here, and it looks like only one person, which may have been me, has been able to successfully load the website. I tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and abort this exercise. I apologize for that. I think I need to restart my server. Shadow IT. Oh man, I'm going to get in so much trouble. Sorry everybody for wasting your time on that. But I thought it'd be fun to kind of do a live game theory game, because this is something I actually do with my students in the classroom. We do, and I have more than just this game, but I do game theory games, and we talk through them afterwards. So let me get back to my slides here. Sorry about that. And I'm not going to spoil the surprise. I was going to kind of talk through the game and how you would win the game, but that'd be a little anticlimactic now. Next time we can do that. But let me just wrap up here. So that's an example of game theory kind of in a classroom setting. I actually have a set of slides that I'm going to share with you later on how you might be able to teach this or learn it yourself. But I want to come back to a question that you might all be asking, and certainly my students would be asking at this point. Wait a second, you were talking about cybersecurity, and now all of a sudden you're talking about game theory. What does that have to do with, why am I sitting here in a cybersecurity class learning about game theory? Well, this is the takeaway. Cybersecurity is an adversarial conflict. Without adversary, cybersecurity doesn't exist. We don't need cybersecurity. Therefore, adversarial thinking is the hallmark of cybersecurity. Adversarial thinking has multiple different dimensions, but one of those dimensions is strategic reasoning. It's the ability to anticipate the strategic actions of my adversary. A great way to teach, and maybe it's not the only way, but it could be really the best way to teach strategic reasoning is actually by teaching game theory. So in teaching game theory, you're helping your students take a more strategic approach to their practice of cybersecurity. Because what can go wrong in cyber ed is we can give our students all kinds of tools, and we can teach them how to configure firewalls and how to harden an operating system. And actually, we need to do that. They have to have those skills. But if that's all they take away from our class, and so they're sitting down, heads down on a keyboard, securing their infrastructure, I think they're sitting ducks for a cyber attack, because the adversary is out there watching them do what they're doing and then creating a plan for how I can subvert, how I can attack that network infrastructure or those computer systems. So when you teach something like game theory in a cyber ed curriculum, the goal is to help your students yep, definitely be hands-on keyboard, get your head down, get your firewall installed, make sure multi-factor authentication's rolled out, et cetera, do all the security best practices. But also regularly look up and to think to yourself, all right, what are my adversaries seeing right now? How might I be attacked right now? What could I do to get ahead of that attack? If I'm being attacked right now, how might my adversary be attacking me? How would I know they're attacking me? Just asking those questions, getting in the head of your adversary, kind of from a strategic perspective, can help you be better at cybersecurity. So I think this is a great hook for one, introducing students to cybersecurity, because it's not technical. You're not teaching them code or math or anything like that. And depending on if the Colonel Blotto game would have worked, and I have a few other games, and there's many different game theory games, to just teach them basics. I teach them something called level K reasoning, which is one of the main tenets of behavioral game theory, which is something that I teach my students. They enjoy it. They think it's interesting. In fact, some of them, they go and they take those skills and they go out and they use them with their friends in different games that they're already playing. And I think that would go for middle school, high school, or college students like the ones I teach. And that can kind of be a hook to think, hey, actually, cybersecurity is pretty interesting. Like, you kind of do this type of thing in cybersecurity. And so I'm not necessarily teaching them a specific skill in game theory where they're going to go out there and they're going to draw like some game theoretical equation and solve it. That's not really my goal. I'm not teaching them game theory at that level. Rather, I'm just planting in their heads, I think, in an indelible way, that strategic reasoning is important, and that I need to be aware of human adversaries. And that's what makes cybersecurity interesting and also really hard. And just giving them that constant reminder to be vigilant, to think about different ways of attack, maybe supply chain attacks or other means of attack that aren't obvious, but if I take the time to think it through, that I might find before my attacker finds them. So my overarching goals when I teach this content is to make indelible the association between strategic reasoning and cybersecurity, and to do this in such a way that it endures. I don't necessarily know that they'll remember what the Colonel Blotto game is, but they will remember that they learned about game theory when they were a cyber student, and that will stick with them. And that's part of what goes into an education. It's a reframing of how I think about something or what I understand the problem to be. And just spending a week teaching game theory in one of your cyber classes can really turn on those light bulbs in an enduring way for our students. So I mentioned earlier that I have a publication out there. I have a couple. One was in CISSP a few years ago. It's published in the journal, called Teaching Adversarial Thinking for Cybersecurity.
You have a box in your car?
I have another one called Teaching Game Theory to Improve Adversarial Thinking in Cybersecurity, and the IEEE transactions on it.
I'll go take a look.
I can send that to you if you're interested. I actually also, in my PhD work, I did apply game theory, and that's where this all came from. I have a book chapter out there from a while ago when I was a student at AFIT, applying behavioral game theory to cyber physical systems protection planning. And I take the Colonel Blotto game and I apply key-level reasoning. I come up with a mathematical solver. And I don't know, no one's ever going to use this. I don't think it's really that practical. But I actually tried to use game theory in cybersecurity, which that's not something I try to get my students to do, in this way. That's just way too niche than what we can really accomplish in middle school, high school, or even in an undergraduate setting. I have this curriculum. In fact, the NSA funded it, the production of a module. It's a week-long module on adversarial thinking, and its hosts out there at clark.center. I think most of you are familiar with Clark. It created out of Towson University. The NSA has helped fund it. And I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but it's a curriculum library for cybersecurity content. Most of it's peer-reviewed. And if you go out there and you Google or search for adversarial thinking, you'll find my curriculum. I do think you have to be a registered user, but then it's all free and it's all Creative Commons license. And I have links to those articles. I have slides, I have slide notes, I have all my exercises. I even have an assessment that you can do a pre-test, post-test, and see whether or not your students' adversarial thinking abilities have improved. And every time I've done this, I find that they do improve. And that's what I published in my IEEE transactions article, that I actually did conduct a formal experiment. And I contend that this does improve our students' ability to understand our adversarial actions and then anticipate those actions. Does anybody have any questions? I think we're running out of time here. We've only got a few minutes, but does anybody have any questions for me? I see Ed says all 120 in A, winner. You can try that one, Ed, for your Colonel Blotto game, but I don't know that will. You'll win one battlefield, I promise you that. Yes, you win one battle, but you lose the war for sure. In an equal allocation game like this, you actually cannot win all the battlefields. With your opponent having, which I didn't really say that in the Colonel Blotto setup that I was giving you in the 2 minutes, I was going to talk about how this was going to be graded. Everybody was going to play against everybody else, and you were going to just accumulate as many wins as you could possibly get, kind of in a nested for loop kind of a way. 29 times 4, that would be an allocation strategy. Thank you all. I'm not seeing any questions. If you guys have any follow-up for me, I'd love to engage about this. A list of games that I recommend in my curriculum, Susan, I talk about a few different games. One of them is called the 2/3 guessing game. And that's a real simple game that I play in real time with my students, and I love, they enjoy that. It's kind of like when you play the birthday game, the birthday paradox, and you try to find two people with the same birthday, where you get a really good learning outcome with just a very simple, fun game. There's a few of those that I have in my slides. And if you guys want to, is Risk a good game theory game? I think it is. I think a lot of board games have game theory elements in them because there's interdependent decision making. So like what wouldn't be a game theory game is probably a lot of the video games, or like a game like Solitaire. That wouldn't be game theory because there's not interdependent decision making. But a lot of the games that we enjoy that are board games that are kind of like chess-like, definitely, they are game theory games. The Monty Hall game, that one, I don't know if that's a game theory game because do you have an opponent in that? I guess your opponent, yeah, that would be. Your opponent would be the one that hides the prize, and then you would be the one that picks where the prize is. Yeah, so Monty is your opponent. That would be a game theory game. That would work. And you could analyze that from a game theoretical perspective. And when I get in my lecture notes, I talk about the difference between analytical game theory, where you can solve a game mathematically, and behavioral game theory, which I think is more applicable to cybersecurity, which is really where you're not, yes, Tversky, I do get into that. When they hide and seek game, I think that's one of their games. And there's a couple other games of theirs that I talk about in my slides. You guys are good. You're on it. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for your time. Reach out if you have any questions. It was a pleasure talking with you all today.
All right.